That's a
Yeah,
great way to build sales skill. And what I mean by sales skill is just getting told no all the time.
all the time. Yeah, I mean, that was like the one word that I knew better than anything. In that type of environment, too, you had to be quick. You had to think fast.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Forat.
And I'm Justin Nagel, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the three pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is Jon Szeliga, Chief Sales Officer at Engineering Wireless Services, or EWS, and Chief Revenue Officer at Amplify Q. With nearly 20 years of telecommunications experience, Jon has built a career around expanding wireless connectivity in some of the most challenging environments. He started his career in 2007 as a field technician and quickly rose through the ranks, helping to build EWS's business development engine from the ground up. Today, Jon leads nationwide sales strategy, large-scale developments, and partnerships with Fortune 500 companies, healthcare systems, and public agencies. At Amplify Q, he is spearheading the growth of the neutral host signal source services, which is hell of a mouthful, Jon. I'm going to tell you that right now. Delivering private LTE, 4G, and 5G in buildings where traditional carrier models fall short. EWS is a national systems integrator specializing in DOS, public safety communications, and private cellular networks, keeping hospitals, airports, stadiums, and government buildings connected. And with all that said, Jon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks.
Yes. So that is a mouthful. What the hell does that mean? That's my first question. Question one. Before I even ask about the business or you in your story, I'd like to know what neutral host signal source services are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in our space, in the wireless telecommunications space, there's different types of infrastructure and systems that can be deployed. They're dedicated for a single provider, like just AT&T, just T-Mobile, just Verizon, or just emergency responder radio coverage. And then there's the neutral host systems, which are, essentially a neutral platform for all providers to be integrated and provide service into any type of facility.
Okay. That makes sense to me. It just sounds like a mouthful. It's actually
it is a mouthful. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So tell us about your story. So obviously about 20 years ago, or getting close to that, going into the industry, starting as a field technician, but tell us the real story and then tell us about EWS.
Yeah. So I started in 2007 with EWS. Position, it was an entry-level RF engineer, radio frequency engineer with T-Mobile. So I got a lot of opportunity to really see the inner workings of the network side of things. But, starting as a contractor, contracts only last for so long. And at the end of my contract, I ended up just having to be a little more creative. I started working in the field, supporting new site development and deployment for T-Mobile specifically, so prepping the equipment that is at the tower. So the base stations and the radios that would be on the ground tower, the antenna systems, just getting everything ready for the contractors that would do the build outs and installations, and work my way around that. I got to learn a lot in that scenario because it was all hands on. So I got to see the equipment, I got to feel it, touch it, program it, understand how it worked, which gave me a good knowledge base for how it works. How does this happen? This is where 5 bars of signal comes from. It comes from these devices. So it was a really neat opportunity. But, working in the valley, in Phoenix Valley through the summers, it's not very fun.
Not outside.
Yeah, and the way that planning worked on the carrier side, it's like we're going to build everything in Phoenix in the summer at the hottest time, and then you know what? We're going to do all the rest of the builds north in the winter. So it's either you're burning up or you're freezing, and it was tough to get used to that. So I had a couple more opportunities come up. There were requests for in-building coverage and distributed antenna systems. So I thought to myself, why would I want to work outside when I can work in this climate-controlled environment and not have to worry about anything? So transitioned pretty quick into that space, into the DAS space and the in-building coverage space. And I really enjoyed it. Every building is different. Every facility is different. So it wasn't just doing the same thing every day. Get to see a lot of really interesting places, high security environments. So it was neat. But over time, we started to slow down in the opportunities that were coming in from our carrier partners. It's common cycles that take place where the work slows down. So, and working with my boss, the owner of the company, we were strategizing and said, you know what, we don't have dedicated sales group. We don't have anyone that's focused on sales. And so that was really the birth of the sales division and business development division within our company a little over 10 years ago now. That's been fun. I've been doing this now for, with the same company almost, it'll be 19 years in January. So, I just really enjoy it. I love getting to travel around to our different customers and educate people and help them understand what it is we do, why we do it, why they need these types of systems and solutions in their buildings. And, just building the value behind those types of deployments.
So, when I hear like in the field working, understanding the tech component and then sales, the other side, those usually are not the same brain generally, right? Obviously there's crossover. So were you more like, I am more salesy branded, or am I more engineering-y branded? Or was it like, no, you got both sides and then the transition became easy, not that sales is easy, but like it was an easier transition?
Yeah, I think having a technical understanding of what we were, providing or at least proposing to our potential customer and clients, I think it helped a lot. A lot of the people that we deal with, they're technical in nature, a lot of IT folks, so they understand network architecture and the infrastructure. I think that was, a big bonus that I had working in my favor for working at engineering wireless at EWS. My younger years, I did, some of the same stuff there. I was a waiter in a restaurant, I bartended a little bit. I actually was one of those extremely annoying people in the mall that sold phones at a kiosk. But,
Okay.
That's a great way to build sales skill. And what I mean by sales skill is just getting told no all the time.
All the time. Yeah. that was like the one word that I knew better than anything. In that type of environment, you had to be quick. You had to think fast. You had to find a way to grab someone's attention and keep them interested in order to build this rapport in a very short period of time. So I think that helped a lot. At one point, I was also a used car salesman.
Wow. Okay.
Those are the
But the best in this scenario, Will.
Of course.
I was in line with, how people feel about, lawyers, right? You're like, oh, the scum of the earth over there. But, it worked.
Yeah, but those skill sets, right, in both those scenarios do propel you to do something much larger and much more impactful, right? Like when you think of the built world and like how important these systems are to have in these major, large, huge buildings, it's like, yeah, having those no's to every person that walked past you at the mall was helpful in then getting, a no or, blown off response from whomever you're working with at the client base, because it can be extraordinarily discouraging, certainly. But once you get through that, yeah, I'm just good 20% of the time. I'm probably average or above average. Then, rock and roll.
Yeah. It's interesting too, is most people don't realize that there is infrastructure and these solutions in place in a lot of the venues they visit. Every major stadium, every large like college campus, they all have architecture, this wireless infrastructure that's there. And to put it more into perspective, wireless phones, like your cell phone. Really that wireless piece, it's only really wireless for maybe a quarter of a mile in most instances, unless you're in a rural environment where there's a very tall tower that's covering a large space. The carrier network in those towers, they're not very tall, especially in dense city environments. They're 60 feet tall, 80 feet tall, and they're only able to support so many users. So then when you take that thought process and you look at the large stadiums, like State Farm Stadium as an example, one that we revamped for this last Super Bowl that was here, but there's over almost 2,000 antennas in that facility for just cellular phone coverage alone. It's a big undertaking and a lot of actual necessary infrastructure that's there. Tons of fiber, lots of coax, lots of antennas, amplifiers. They're big build-outs.
Yeah, that's I was actually just there this past weekend and had no issue with the coverage. So hey, that's some feedback for you and the team where you're still good. Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about that idea though, like selling this thing that people don't know about. Right? That's how it like we when we're talking about infrastructure, cybersecurity is easier for us. People generally have an understanding they want to be protected. Infrastructure in their business though is this thing that's like elusive. They don't get it, and there's a lot of education that has to go to it. So what does the sales process look like for you? Is it educational, or what has to be done to like sell a thing that most people don't understand or don't know about?
Yeah, most of them, I mean, there's a lot of upfront education that takes place with how we present to the potential customer. We get lucky sometimes, and we'll run across a group that is familiar with these systems. They've seen them in the past, or they've had interactions with one of the wireless providers. Years ago, it was very common for businesses to have large group accounts of so maybe a large account for Verizon, and they'd have 1,000 phones. As part of those agreements, that carrier would provide infrastructure within those buildings so that the users would have 5 bars of coverage throughout, because they have to have that positive user experience to keep users from transitioning to another provider. So there is some familiarity there with larger corporations, but in a lot of instances, you'll see a group or a facility that does have issues. They'll recognize like, oh man, I've got really terrible coverage here. Or staff is complaining that there's call drops, or their data throughput is terrible and they don't want to connect to the Wi-Fi. Well, luckily, with modern technology and things like Google, most people can go in and type their issue up, and they'll all of a sudden have these suggestions for types of infrastructure solutions that could fix this. Other groups, that may be savvy on the IT side, but don't really know what they're looking for, they'll reach out to, let's say, like a distribution partner that they buy cable from. And those guys will typically know the solutions and products and vendors like us that can support these.
Got it. Okay. And how do you find, or how do you vet out a good salesperson? Or have you oversee sales across the country? How do you find those people? Sales people can be elusive to find the right ones. So how's that work?
It's a dice roll. I mean, I've been pretty fortunate. A few of the members on the team right now are people that I've met over the years. One was actually a part of the construction team here. He managed the operations and construction for our company with the build outs with Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T. So he, for one, knew a lot of the contacts that we had, and then two, understood what we were, proposing and selling in this space. Person that I have appointed as the national director for the team, he's actually out of Atlanta. I found him through a distribution partner, one of the companies that we buy product from, cable, antennas, and these parts and pieces. And, we hit it off. A really cool guy, great personality, just real fast thinking and quick talking sales guy. And he's been on the team now for a little over 6 years. Just, great add to the team. And, just we get lucky sometimes. Most of the people have industry experience that I find. And then from there, it's, do they sell? And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And then you just kind of roll the punches, right?
When you're overseeing, obviously you got to hold people accountable. What does that look like? And like, do you have a literally scorecard, or is it like, hey, here's your quota for the quarter, or here's your quota for the year, whatever, however you want to, put a timeline on it. And it's like, you either hit or you don't, and then that's it.
Yeah, it's kind of how it works. I mean, we set quarterly expectations, targets for each salesperson to hit. And each person is actually assigned specific verticals to focus on as well, either like healthcare, hospitality, public venues, government type work, utility work. And so they've got those specific target areas, and they do all have quarterly expectations. If you miss a quarter, that kind of thing happens, right? But if you miss all year long, you're probably looking for a job somewhere else. And sales, the way that we have it set up, and I think it's really similar across the board with other companies, is it's commission driven, right? So there's incentive to sell more. Everyone wants to make more money.
Well, if it takes that long to figure it out, obviously, are you looking for someone that has quote unquote book of business, sort of prior relationships?
Yeah, it helps. It definitely helps a lot. I have hired people in the past based on things like that, their experience, just the circles they run in, the groups that they know, and things that I've seen them do in the past. But it's not a deal breaker if you don't already have, it's really just about your personality too, and being forward thinking and having that drive to really just go out and chase things down.
Do you have any litmus tests?
Not really.
No.
I'm kind of goofy when it comes to interviewing people and trying to get a feel for them. I ask dumb questions in their interview, like, where do your favorite French fries come from? Are you a McDonald's guy or a Burger King guy? And depending on how they respond, if it's quick, if they have an immediate answer, if they just, ball shut down, that could be a deciding factor for me because, you got to think fast. But, aside from that, try to build up a little bit of a relationship prior to even interviewing someone. Got a good feel about someone, I'll spend 6 months talking to them off and on, just kind of feeling it out. And, things still look good and what they do throughout the course of that time prior to even an interview, that kind of helps me at least make a decision.
Now that's interesting to take it in a direction that's very off the wall, essentially. Also, anybody listening, the actual answer to that is definitely Arby's curly fries. Everybody knows that. That's pretty straightforward. But nonetheless, so what, how are you diving into these clients? Like what does that look like? It's just relationships that are built over time? Is it like you're running ads, or you do how are you driving more and more to it? Because obviously as you go from local to national and going bigger and bigger, and obviously doing massive facilities, there are only so many massive facilities. Your demographic is smaller than like, hey, we do houses. And it's like, oh, well,
right.
You have the supply is endless. So you have to be really specific about how we're attacking it. What does that look like?
Yeah. So, we're in the Phoenix Valley, for instance. We're kind of lucky. There's a lot of low hanging fruit with new construction, new buildings going up. A lot of those will have requirements based on fire code to have a system put in place for the emergency responder radio coverage. It's a necessary item, but so depending on the jurisdiction and who the AHJ is, which stands for authority having jurisdiction, if it's a fire marshal or whoever it may be, they'll dictate and require coverage solutions specific to, policing fire facilities, let's say over 30,000 square feet or over 50,000 square feet, or if they have underground parking, which, once you go underground, signal's not really going to get down there. So those ones are kind of easy for us to go after. The piece that's not really included because it's not a code requirement is the cellular side. So that's a little bit of a harder sell. And, there's a cost associated with it. Most companies that are planning for structure and new construction don't plan for that cost. So it's usually an after the fact. But, it's, in my opinion, it's easier to deal with it in the beginning and, ask for the extra money instead of doing it after construction is complete, because we're going to go in there and be up in the ceilings. We might have to, break into a hard lit area and then do patch and paint afterwards. The cost for installation and construction of that system goes up significantly in a finished building. If we're good enough at selling, right, and convincing, we can get them in the beginning, but it's hit or miss.
Got it. So is that something you find often where companies, they build whatever the structure is, and then like the fire marshal or the authority comes in and says, hey, this won't work. You need to go use somebody like John to make your emergency go.
Yeah, we're always kind of the bad guy, I guess, because it's not really, it's really not until the 11th hour that we can, say confidently that, yes, you do need this system. Some buildings, the new construction might be close to a serving site for the radio signal that police and fire use, and boom, they're going to have coverage throughout the facility. No system needed. Others, with the new types of construction and trying to think of terminology. Of course, when I'm on camera, I forget these things.
It's okay. It's like the camera's not there. That's how I live my life, but I'm pretty sure I'm always on camera.
Yeah, and so in like new energy efficient type buildings, right, where you've got the coated glass and things like that, those block signal really well. I love that stuff, but the end result is you're almost always going to need some type of enhancement for radio coverage for either police, fire, or cellular, which is great on our side of things, but we actually can't test to verify and validate the building will need a system until windows are up, the walls are up, doors are in place. We need all those potential blocking items there to validate whether or not a solution is going to be needed. So that's kind of where we come in as the evil bad person. But it's a necessary evil. These systems, especially the first responder systems, being code requirement, it's for the safety of those first responders that go in the event of an emergency. The kicker on that, though, this is one of the things that I love to bring up and talk about, is while that is a code required item, what's missed is the cellular piece in a lot of instances because it's not code, it doesn't have to be put in. But if you look at the data on where most emergency calls are placed, it's a mobile device. It's on your cell phone. Most people have multiple devices that are connected to, smartwatches. Maybe they've got a tablet with them as well, in addition to their phone. Maybe their laptop actually runs on, Verizon or T-Mobile or AT&T wireless signal instead of Wi-Fi. Those are all factors and things that need to be taken into consideration. And it's the well-being of the actual staff or users. You want to have happy people in your facilities. Let's say you're in a grocery store now with things like Instacart, you've got these mobile shoppers that are using apps on their phones, so that it makes sense to have good connectivity in addition to just the standard Wi-Fi. You don't want to overload your Wi-Fi with traffic, or even potentially have someone trying to hack your system. I mean, those are all different things to worry about these days.
So if the standard around emergency systems, right, the emergency responders, that's what you're going for. Well, is it really that different of a technology in comparison to the cellular technologies? Or do they run side by side, or is it really, really different?
They are different. The network standards are different. The types of radio networks are different. In most first responder, like in city environments, they will operate in the 700 or 800 megahertz frequency range, and it's two-way radio. The cellular piece, the mobile operators, they have multiple frequency bands they utilize, ranging from 600 megahertz and all the way up to the millimeter wave. It's not something we deploy on these types of systems, just because high frequency. Our systems are focused on basically everything that's sub 6 gigahertz. So 600 up to 2500 megahertz, and in most cases for the carrier side. And because they operate on higher frequencies, the antenna density is different in these in-building environments, right? Higher frequency, the shorter the distance that signal is going to propagate. Lower frequency, you go all the way down to like VHF, UHF, and those first responder places, they penetrate and they travel much better. So the antenna density is less. So there are some codes now, some different standards that do allow converged systems where you can have first responder networks on the cellular side of things, but it's a little tricky to design around.
You'd mentioned the efficiencies, like a LEED building, right? Like a building that's LEED certified. Those tend to, because of how they are being built specifically to be energy efficient, those you find them at a higher proportion that, like, hey, generally you're going to need things if you're not sitting right next to a antenna. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. LEED certified buildings, I mean, the way that they are built, they're great at blocking radio frequency from coming in. That's why I always joke around that those are my favorite types of environments, because we can almost guarantee that the coverage internal to the building is going to be terrible. So that's more of the low hanging fruit, I think, for us.
Yeah. So then, is that easier on the front end when you're working like with a GC or the developer, whoever it is, and saying like, you're gonna have to do this, like 95% of the time a LEED building is without question gonna cause this problem, so you want to do this now, because otherwise it'll be 3 or 4x the cost on the back end if we have to rip out stuff and redo the construction.
Yeah, that's always our pitch, educational process too, and just helping educate the end customer that this is going to be a necessary item, especially if you want that amazing experience for the tenants within the building or guests that are coming through. So, we do see it a little bit more now in, these current times, that building construction companies and the building owners, they are a little bit more in the know as to how these things are working, and that it might be a necessary item for them to consider. So it's been helpful. I will say that with a luxury apartment complex being built in the north part of the valley, they've already started planning to include this type of infrastructure for cellular in their new facility well in advance of the completion. So it's nice. It's a nice thing to have, at least now that people are becoming more used to this. And understand that there are products available for it, that they are considering this in advance. It makes everyone's life a little bit easier.
Yeah. Okay.
So lead buildings obviously block signal, but then you've got the everything else in between. How does someone budget, right? Because what you said is that not until the building is pretty much complete can you actually tell whether or not you can essentially someone's going to need services such as yourself to be able to go in and put in these devices and put in the lines, right? So that the signal, whether it's the emergency signal, cell signal, all the above, right? Where all these signals will actually propagate through the building. So how does someone budget for something like that? Especially like, owners and building owners, let alone GCs. GC doesn't even think about it, then that's a real problem.
Yeah, it's a good question. We've got a lot of historical data that allows us to put together budgets based on square footage, and depending on building type, that gives us an idea of the density. In the first responder radio solution space, it's common to see as low as 30 cents a square foot and maybe as high as, $1 or $1.15 to $1.25 a square foot, depending on the frequencies that need to be deployed and the scale of the deployment itself. If we're looking at a full scale coverage solution for the entire building, obviously your cost is going to be higher. In a lot of cases though, you don't need full building coverage for that type of system. We just need to make sure that the coverage meets the requirements set by the standards for code requirements there. So it's typically neg 95 over 95% of the facility. You could have half of the facility already having coverage from the outside network, and you really only have to do a portion. So it's always best just to put in the worst case scenario number on that. And the same thing with cellular. Cellular, it's a little bit tricky if we're not using. If we are using something that is considered Part 20, which means it does not need to have a retransmission agreement approved from carriers, that can be partial coverage as well. And those solutions are much lower cost. Down to 50 cents a square foot, depending on density, and upwards of $2 a square foot. Or in the larger systems, the full-blown neutral host systems where we've got all three of the main carriers and operators feeding into this neutral system throughout the entire building. Those have to meet specific design criteria that's in place by each carrier. Because if you think about this, the carriers own and operate that spectrum. So if you only cover part of the building and it's not up to their standard, the user is going to walk in. They're not going to know that there's a system in place that some integrator like us had deployed. They're just going to assume that Verizon, T-Mobile, or AT&T is terrible in the area and could result in them switching to another provider. So because of that, we have to meet these specific standards and ensure that, the end user, the general public is going to walk in, they're going to have 5 bars of coverage throughout the facility. And the transition as they walk in and out of the buildings, it hands off properly between the networks. So, with that and those dense networks, the cost is going to be significantly higher, usually $1 to upwards of $6 a square foot, depending on the network type. You can see there's a pretty wide range there. So if you're looking at a 200,000 square foot facility, it could be around $200,000 or 6x that.
Mm.
Just more out of curiosity, is it the FCC that's dictating this, or is it the actual carriers that's
It's the
dictating
carriers.
this?
Yeah, the carriers have their design criteria that we have to meet. And so us as a vendor that works directly with Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, Dish, we know those standards. That's kind of the baseline for how we put our designs together for the solutions that we present to the customers, guaranteeing that they're going to have that user experience that they expect.
Okay, so it really is around those carriers. Is there any
Right?
reason?
Yeah, they
there any-
operate that spectrum, and they their expectation is if there is something there broadcasting their technologies and their spectrum and frequencies, they want it to be top notch, great performing solution. So it's understandable.
So I also imagine that there's probably some fire code around all of this.
Not on the cellular side. So really the fire code, it really only applies to the first responder network side of things, but there's a design standard there as well. We just have to ensure that adequate signal strength throughout the facility is met, and specifically to emergency areas, right? So stairwells, pump rooms, anywhere that's going to be in use by first responders in the events of those emergencies.
Okay.
Totally makes sense.
Code-wise, I have to imagine every jurisdiction's different state, different jurisdiction, different city, maybe even different. Is that?
Yeah,
I feel like if you're doing nationwide work, or you're not just in the Valley here, that could get complicated. But then also, there's got to be some that are like, oh man, the level of this is very low compared to somewhere else, which is extraordinarily high.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge across the country. It varies depending on, county, city. Everyone interprets code differently, and the AHJ, the authority having jurisdictions, maybe they're having a bad day and they want everything in conduit, or they want 2-hour rated coax cable used throughout an entire facility. Those items have a huge impact on the cost to the customer as well, because the standard half-inch cable, coax cable, a couple dollars a foot or $3 a foot at worst, but the 2-hour rated half-inch cable, $75 a foot. So you can see where the cost could climb very quick. And it's always tricky to really know what code is going to be in a given area. Luckily, we've got resources like the Safer Buildings Coalition, a group that we work very closely with, and they do a great job at keeping track of what code is being enforced in what jurisdiction. So it's a good reference point, and they're actually very helpful to all the integrators within the space. They want to have they want everything to work right, because it's important at the end of the day to ensuring that our first responders have the connection and ability to communicate that they need in those situations.
So an organization like the Safer Building Coalition, is that just like, hey, there's just an informative organization, or is that like something you partner up with?
There's a cost associated with membership for integrators and companies like us, but they actually travel around the U.S. Doing a lot of informative sessions and get-togethers with local jurisdictions, higher education, K-12. They'll support and help everyone and anyone really in any case possible. So their end goal is communication and that network connectivity and just ensuring that people are safe. Then a good component in the cellular space as well. But like I said earlier, most emergency calls they originate from a mobile device. Not a lot of landlines in use anymore. You throw a rotary phone in front of someone that's under 30, they probably not even know how to use that either. So
it's very
What's
true.
a rotary phone?
Yes. There's no touchscreen on here. Yes, no, there's not.
yeah.
So code-wise, like, who is most strict? Are you able to talk about like this area? If you're trying to build a building, you are going to need, no question. It's so strict that the code is just not necessarily overbearing. I don't want to put it that way, but like it is over the top compared to the average for the rest of the country.
Yeah, in most big cities, you're going to see a lot of attention put into these solutions, especially on the first responder side. Phoenix is pretty strict. I'll tell you that. I've worked with the Phoenix Fire Group for a number of years, and sometimes we don't get along. But it is what it is. California's got some pretty strict jurisdictions. Florida is actually very, very strict as well, and very quick to enforce code. The thing is too, it can mean life or death, and so having that level of attention to this, it's necessary.
Yeah, that makes sense. Bigger city, just denser populations. It also probably, if you're the expert at this, but like more or less people in an area, generally you have more or less frequencies flying around, or less radio disturbance, or is that no? That's not true at all.
It depends. It's luckily there's with each of these systems that are out there are folks monitoring the radio network. And, local to Phoenix, the group that manages the first responder radio network here is a regional wireless co-op, and they're a bunch of engineers and radio guys. So they're constantly monitoring and checking the health of their systems. But there's potential for interference. There always is, especially when you look into the radio frequency side of things. That attention to the networks has to happen too. Like on the carrier side, there's buildings full of engineers that are constantly monitoring the KPIs or key performance indicators of systems and the health of the networks to ensure that there's not call drops or network outages. That's the same thing on the first responder side.
Okay, makes sense.
totally, just because of our current administration, and I'm trying not to be political here for a second. There have been some mandates around stricter enforcement, around security. Have those mandates somehow, especially because of first responder networks, but have those mandates somehow carried down to essentially affecting what you guys are doing?
Not yet. We have seen on the cellular side, those networks are very secure. It's an encrypted network. There's not a whole lot you can do to break into it unless you get in through the actual switch side of things and the network itself. You're not going to break into it over the air. On the first responder side, slightly different technology, but it's not easy to, same thing, to break into it and arm the network from the ground away from the towers or the radio equipment itself. Sure, you could probably listen in if you've got the right equipment, but the impact of the network is going to be pretty minimal. Single jammers or blockers are probably the biggest risk to the network health. But those are mostly illegal, kind of hard to get. Yeah, outside of that, we've seen a little bit more movement, approvals for new spectrum, or that are related to some of the technology updates and ads that the carriers want to do with this administration. And that's really it, though. Nothing else that's harming us. If anything, there's been a benefit to our industry, specifically the integrators, because of some of the actions that the FCC has taken in their meetings and partnerships with groups like NATE, which is a National Association of Tower Erectors. They work on behalf of companies like us to help in this, ever-changing environment. So that, the carrier space and the construction side, those customers know the cost of these systems. They know exactly how much it costs for a tower, what the typical cost is going to be for an indoor coverage solution. And they've kind of used that against us over the years. They continue to drive our prices down while the cost of goods and cost of living continues to go up. And so with, our friends in the industry like NATE and Safer Buildings, with them supporting some of these efforts with the FCC, it's actually made things better for companies like us.
Okay, so that makes sense. Essentially, unless you have physical access, so when you say switches, you're talking about actual physical access to where sort of the cables, because wireless isn't truly wireless. There's cable that's run under.
Tons of cable. There's fiber. Almost every cell tower, cell site has fiber onto it. You've got multi-gig circuits to support the throughput and the bandwidth that the end users need. Yeah, your wireless is only wireless for a little bit.
Something else that I was thinking about. Safety has to look a little different, right? You have safety when it comes to like if your steel structures, right? What does safety look like when you're around these wireless? Essentially these are wireless devices that are emitting frequency. Is it any different?
No, there's a lot of different things that we have to take into account, especially with working near live cell sites or live radio towers, safety network, or even the old broadcast towers. You'll feel it if you're too close for too long on an active site. I mean, that is energy that's being emitted. Typical signs of overexposure to radio frequency, you start sweating, you feel nauseous, get dizzy. So it's definitely not somewhere you want to hang out. But in most cases, if we are working on live sites, we'll usually do maintenance within a maintenance window. So overnight, when the traffic is lowest and there's the least amount of users, we coordinate those downtimes with whoever the operator is for that area. When it comes to the actual build side of things, we have a number of policies in place. We have regular training for all of our employees. And we require the same standards with subcontractor partners that we use because it is dangerous. The radio towers themselves, they're 80 feet. Some in the more rural areas, they could be, 1,000 feet tall. It could be a 1,000-foot tall guide wire tower. And it's a lot of climbing. There's a lot of risk with those types of those work environments. Ensuring that our climbers are 100% tie off all the time so that there's always connection to something physical. There's the unfortunate event where they slip, they're still attached, right? They might bang their head a little bit, but they're not falling all the way to the ground. In the indoor environments, we operate and work a lot on scissor lifts and ladders and scaffolding. Some instances we're up in the catwalk areas. We've got a project coming up at an arena here in the downtown area of Phoenix. We're installing a bunch of radios and antennas on the catwalk area in these elevated spaces. So, there's a risk of if something fall, drop something, trip and fall yourself. I mean, it's very important for us. Safety is a very important item that we take very seriously here. We want to make sure everyone is making it home at the end of the day to their family and also enjoying the things they do and not having these major risks or potential hazards that could harm them.
It's a little different. There's a name for that. Is that radiation sickness? Is that what that is?
I mean, yeah, kind of. It's non-ionizing radiation, but so it's on the cellular side and the first responder network side. But it doesn't feel good. I remember when I was much younger, working in the test bed area with one of our carrier partners. I was testing some amplifiers that we were deploying in the network prior to launching 3G. So this is a while ago. I was working with another technician and just calibrating some equipment. I had it attached to a small antenna, had this amplifier, a signal generator running through some other equipment for calibration, going to an antenna. And I forgot I left it on. I was standing there, we're having a conversation, and after 5 minutes, I'm just sweating bullets. And I'm like, yeah, I feel good. And the other person I was with looked over, he goes, "Did you leave that thing on?" I was like, "Oh, man, sorry." So I ran over there, hit the button, and then it passed a few minutes later. It's not fun.
Ooh, okay. Well, it's basically frying your insides out. It's like a microwave.
Yeah, that's the other example I was going to use. How do you think your food's heating up in there? It's radio waves.
Oof.
You could have become a superhero like Radio Man or something. It'd have been cool.
Yeah, right.
I was thinking about this for a little bit. Is it the same because of the different types of networks, the different types of frequencies? Can you put everything all in the same location, meaning your different antennas, right? For like if you have a really large coverage, I know that there's some problems because of the different frequency ranges. Can everything be put into the same box and it just works? Or you have to design things differently because of the different frequency ranges?
We do have to design different, and we have to design around the different frequencies we have deployed. So in an indoor environment, we have shared infrastructure, but we'll have, like, let's say we're using a traditional distributed antenna system where we've got the amplifier in the closet and then coax and splitters and antennas out into the serving areas. Well, the coax and that shared infrastructure can support frequencies up to 6,000 megahertz or 6 gigahertz. Actual active equipment, though, like the amplifiers themselves, those are all band specific. So there'll be an individual amplifier within the box for 700 megahertz or 850 or 1900. But then once those are all combined, they can share that common pathway. In the tower side of things, it's a little bit different, but it's also the same. You have amplifiers, you've got the radios, those actual components that generate a signal that your phone sees. And in most cases now, amplifiers are mounted at the back of the antenna, or there could be smart antennas. But each one, the active components, those are all separate. But if you drive by a tower and you look up, you're going to see a set of antennas. All the technologies are bigger. Antennas will be lower frequency. Smaller antennas will be higher frequency.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah. And in some cases too, you'll drive by, or if you're looking at the existing outdoor network, you'll notice that there might be multiple sets of antennas at different heights on a tower. Well, it's just another carrier or provider. There's also shared infrastructure in that environment. They'll have different backhaul circuits coming in because they all connect to their own switch network. Data and calls are processed, but you're looking up at the tower, they'll just another set of antennas. And the reason why they can do that, each operator, whether it's public safety side of things or the carrier mobile networks, they all have their own licensed spectrum that they use, and then they don't really overlap, right? So they've got chunks of different frequencies that belong to them that they can operate in different markets, and there's no real sharing between either of them.
So I want to switch to the technology side for a second. Do you guys use any specific technologies, to help you guys work?
Yeah, of course. On the design side, it's kind of a industry standard. We use a platform called IB Wave. That's really the gold standard across the board for in-building coverage solutions and design. In the outdoor side of things, there's some different tools. ATOL is very popular for the tower propagation side of things. We use very specific equipment for our testing and deployment as well. And high precision has to be calibrated on a pretty regular basis, I'd say every year or 2 years, just to maintain good test results and ensure that the data we're providing actually is accurate data. But yeah, it's definitely an expensive business to be in because the cost of equipment is it's up there. Some of our scanners that we use to go out and collect data, I mean, they're $30,000, $50,000 a piece.
Whoa.
Yeah, so someone says, "Oops, I dropped it." It's like panic button.
Boy.
Yeah, and we have to have multiple devices like that too, because we've got several employees that are out doing testing and any given time, any week too, and it could be one side of the country or could be local. We don't know, so we have to have multiple sets of equipment. In addition to that, we have to have specialized test phones that have very expensive software. I mean, most you'll get like an iPhone or your Samsung Galaxy. Retail price on something like that would be $1,000 or $1,500 if you're buying it direct. The phones that we have, in addition to that, we have a software that's uploaded and it's licensed. That's $10,000 to $15,000 per device, and we have to have a device for every provider. And sometimes we have to have multiple devices to run the amount of tests that we need in some of these larger facilities.
So you could literally just on a job, you could literally have, 150 to $250,000 worth of equipment just to go testing.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah.
boy.
And not just the equipment, like the software is expensive. The design software, we're assigned a certain amount of licenses based on what we pay for to have active users logged into the software to do these design tasks. And it's annual fees. I mean, we're looking at, depending on business size and use, as low as $30,000, but usually over $100,000 a year in licensing fees.
Jeez.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And then I might as well ask them the obvious question. What learning lessons or what do you wish you had known when you're implementing new technologies?
That's a great question, man. I've definitely made plenty of mistakes over the years, and we're probably still paying for a couple of them.
That makes me think that competition wise, you gotta be I'm going to say this in the nicest way, a real player, just simply because just to get that equipment to be able to utilize, it'd be probably hard for me to start one of these in my spare bedroom, is my guess.
Yeah, it's definitely an expensive and costly industry to be in. It's very specialized too. We've got a good number of competitors in this space, some much larger than us, some that are smaller than us, and but there are some good guys out there. We definitely cross paths a lot, but you got to play nice in the sandbox because business is business, but you never know who's gonna end up working with you or who you might end up working for if things change in your career path down the way. So it's good to be nice in the industry, but
it's one of the weird spaces where today you're my competitor, tomorrow I have to be friends with you.
Yeah.
And I'm partnering with you on some large project to get so that everyone can get a piece of the pie. This is one of the weird places of the industry where you have to play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah, it's funky. I've seen this happen over the years too, where one of our competitors will start working for one of our carrier partners or for a third-party operator. And when I say third-party operator, this company is like Crown Castle, Boingo. Boingo is a pretty well-known name because you go into the airport, most of the time the Wi-Fi is hosted by Boingo. They also provide networks and infrastructure for the carrier groups to attach to, usually large stadiums. But you never know what's going to happen or who you're going to run into.
Makes sense.
Just because this is a topic that keeps popping up, might as well ask. AI. What are you guys found in terms of AI? Is it usable? Have you started finding applications for it, applicability for it? Have you started integrating it? Where are you guys at on your AI journey?
Yeah, I think across the company, everyone's using AI on a daily basis, whether it's increasing some of the efficiencies for finding documents or troubleshooting guides or equipment information within our databases, or even just down to like predictive analysis for monitoring on the sites that we have deployed with our customer sites. But those are probably the most common areas that we're seeing and using it right now. On the carrier side, I've been told that they're starting to implement AI everywhere. Their network planning and the monitoring of their networks, the optimization of their networks. It's going to probably start replacing a few people here and there over the years to come, but it's definitely there. We see it daily right now.
Okay. Justin, I think it's that time.
Yeah, I think you're right. John, we like to ask this question to all of our guests. So if you could go back 20 years, what advice would you give yourselves? 2005.
Ugh.
Were you at the mall at this point slanging cell phones? Is that where you were at in 2005?
I think I just left that, and
Okay.
I was working at Radio Shack.
Ooh, radio. Man, you
Those are
really
so
do love radio. Like radio
You
is
and I
your
have
shit.
you and I have more in common than you realize. I worked at a Radio Shack. Maybe not in 2005, but I've worked at a Radio Shack.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd probably force myself to expanding our sales group earlier, to working in the space that's not funded by the carrier folks, and then just try to educate more people about what we do earlier in my career.
Good lesson.
Yeah, it's the best I can do. Either that or just buy more lottery tickets.
Back to the Future. Yeah, the Back to the Future, bring back the sports almanac and just let it ride.
Yeah.
Cool. So this has been fun, but how could people get a hold of you if that was, or how could people get a hold of you? What's the best way for them to do that?
Email. I mean, email my phone out there, but the amount of spam calls that I get now, it's hard to even look at it and want to answer it.
Okay.
But yeah, through our website also, we've got a contact us page on the website. My personal email for the company is just first name dot last name at Engineering Wireless Services.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will put that in the show notes. And then is there anything else you'd like to tell the people before we say our goodbyes?
No, just there's a solution. All right. It's not that you don't have to deal and suffer through poor cellular phone coverage. You don't have to live that nightmare of drop calls and not being able to have connectivity to people. There's a solution there.
Cool. Awesome. All right. This has been a ton of fun. And listeners, until next time, adios.
Adios.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
Keep building scale.
scale.